Let me change mics. So I don't know if you were here this morning when I was talking about something we're doing in loving memory of, but if you want to donate money to the Sharing Our Knowledge conference, you can fill out this form and donate money, and we'll say the names of the people throughout the conference and at the banquet Saturday night. So let me know if you want one of these forms, and you turn them into registration. So my name is Jocelyn Estes, and I'm co-MC with Virginia Oliver of the Sharing Our Knowledge Conference. And the theme of the conference is peace, a time of peace and healing. And something that we wanted to do was go over the history of Wrangell, because it's been far from peaceful at periods of time. And so I'm going to ask Richard Rinehart to introduce himself, and he's going to tell us about some of the history of Wrangell. So welcome, Richard.
British Chief, Jacqueline. Tuani kaknakleo hatu sak, tashio hatu sak. Yechna hatsati kiksadi ayahat, gagan hid ayahat, Shtax'heen Khwáan. Welcome, my people. There's way too many people in the audience for me to just recognize one or two. I know so many of you, and I don't have time to go through all that, unfortunately. My roots in Wrangell run really deep, as a lot of you know. I was born here at the old Bishop Rowan Hospital in 1959, graduated from Wrangell High School in 1977. My family are buried in the cemetery here, going clear back to, I think the oldest grave site or stone that I've seen is John Bradley, but like Charlie Acook's in there, and just a number of people on the Rinehart Churchill Bradley family. You know, I always talk about, and I've had to do this testifying to congressmen and senators lately on land claims, that we've been here since time immemorial. And you say that a lot. What does that mean? To me, that means we've been here since before the first glaciers. We were here before the ice, and then as the ice came and formed all the glaciers, and after the ice receded. We were literally here as the valley floors and the mountaintops were formed. And we've been on this land for, we know at least scientifically, for 10,000 years, and I've heard lately 17,000 years, which is old or older than Western civilization. I mean, we have stories, some of the stories we tell, we don't know exactly how old they are, but they're hundreds of years old, and that's older than the United States of America. I put this picture in there just for a little bit of perspective. If any of you recognize this, it's the Flying Raven House, and that's the beaver pole in front of it. This is behind Ramey's today. And those two little boys down there are the one on the left is my father, and the one on the right is Lloyd Rinehart. They grew up in that house, and it was the Rinehart house. The poles that you see inside, they're in the Alaska State Museum. I'm going to talk about several clans, as many as I have some history and background on. I think I have like 10 of them here. I'm pretty sure there's 11, but I couldn't get history on all 11 of them. Other than our clan, like I introduced myself, I'm Kiksadi. I'm not going to go in depth on most of them because it's just really not my place to, and some of you are covered in other places. So the Kiksadi moved from the Nass River as the glaciers were receding. They migrated north, and they first settled along at a place, it's in Bem Canal, called Kix. They called it Kix Bay, and they became the Kiksadi. And it's near, if you look on the charts now, it says Loring or Naha Bay is where I'm talking about. They continued north, and went up to up the Stikine River. They were up there for a long, long time. They settled along just below like Devil's Thumb Mountain, and we have stories about that climbing the mountain to save ourselves from the Great Flood. So a lot of clans talk about their stories and their history, and they'll say it was before the flood or after the flood when they talk about stories. And I think there's stories of the Taku River having to, a lot of the wolf clans were up there, and they were trapped up above the ice, and then they went under the ice of the Taku. And the Stikine, we have similar stories. The Wrangell people moved down to the mouth of the Stikine and settled along what today is, we call Mill Creek and Virginia Lake in Waterfall Town. And they formed there a very large village and stayed there for a long, long time. You'll see on another slide where I talk about the Teton when they actually split off was from that time period. So that was after the flood. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Daikda, Hikdashi, Shanak, Tashi, and Daikshak. Daikda got his name from John Bradley, and John Bradley was a person that Daikda took him up the river, and this is he's actually my great-great-grandfather, and he was Kachati, okay? And he took this gentleman up the river. The person got sick or came across some illness and had to be taken down, and Daikda took him, like carried him on his back and brought him back to safety. This Irish gentleman didn't have a lot to give him. He said, I can't give you a lot, but I really thank you. I'll give you my name. And he gave him the name John Bradley. And that's where the Bradleys in Wrangell, the Bradley family, get their name Bradley from. Daikda and Shanak, they go on these adventures and these long hikes up the Stikine River, and they were up in the area above the village walking around, and they're going up the trail along with Hektashi, I believe, and they come across this big frog, this biggest frog they ever saw. Is a big brown frog, and he says to him, hey, you, and like old man or person or being, let me walk around you. And they walk around him rather than step over him, because that would be disrespecting. The Kiksadis, of course, have their crest as a frog, and it has a lot to do with, at one time, long time ago, versus long time ago, a long time ago, some boys were disrespecting the frog, and one of them was in a trance and brought into the spirit world, and told that, why are you disrespecting this woman? Because he flipped some frog, a female frog, over on her back. He said, you're doing that to your own people. And he came back and he told that story, and that's kind of where that spirit of the frog story came. I'm not going to go into like all the stories and legends that are in the totem poles so much, but that's where that came from. So they're walking along, and they see this big frog in the middle of the trail, and they walk around it. And a bunch of our family names come from this story. We have Daikda, we have Shanak, which is my cousin Mike Hoyt has that name. His son Mike, he's sitting over here. He has that name. Tashi, my name, which I was named after my uncle Herb, is the rough back on the frog, is what that's referring to. And then Daikshak, I need to get that little K at the end, the soft K, is the mountain with two peaks, or two little women. What it's talking about is the snow would snow really deep, and it looked like there's only one peak, and then as the snow came down, you could see there was actually two peaks on the mountain, and my cousin Catherine has that name. So those are some of our stories. When they were walking along on this trail too, another interesting part is they came across like an old village that used to be there, and they could tell there was a landslide that wiped it out. Only the house posts were left. It had happened at some time before. Now this is only just Richard Rinehart theory. So I am theorizing this because of just some other stories I've heard and trying to put two and two together. At one point, the Kiksadi were up the Stikine River. There was a landslide, and then the people split apart. Some of those people moved on to Sitka, and if there are any Sitka Kiksadis, you can dispute this if you want. Like I said, it's just my theory. They moved to Sitka, and I believe that's where the big split of the Kiksadi came, where some of them moved on to Sitka, and then those that stayed behind were the Shtax'heen Khwáan Kiksadi. Kachedi, and I see some Kachedis in the room, so I'm treading on thin ice here if I don't get this right. Sorry, please forgive me. But they are also a Raven Frog clan, and I believe that they were a separate house, a separate clan at the time of the migrations north from the Nass River. The Kachedis migrated north from the Nass River with the Kiksadis and other Raven clans, and they were going. This is a really short version, but they were migrating around, and they ended up at a place called Gamber Bay, and then later at Gut Bay on Baranof Island. What they were looking for was a place that had salmon similar to the sweet-tasting salmon that they had on the Nass River. They found that at Little Pybus Bay, the salmon were what they were expecting or what they were hoping for, and so they settled there. And the little island in front of it became Koch, and the group became known as the Kachedi, or belonging to Koch. That's where they were from. From there, they moved on, and they went up the Stikine River as far as I believe like Telegraph Creek area, and came right up to where the Totems were. There's I believe a lot of Totem and Kachedi that lived together in villages, and then later some of them came down, went off to Cake. Some of them went to Poplar Tree Town or Kotzlaton, Old Town, and then some moved up to Wrangell later when that happened. And it's a large Raven clan. You can see some of the two that are in these pictures is what I could find, and I like this one because it has the two house posts and their clan crest hat on top of a stack of blankets. I think it was in this room right over there, I believe, is where that picture was taken. The Teton, another Raven clan, Raven Frog clan, that were really one and the same as the Kiksadi for a long time. And they moved with the Kiksadi up the Stikine River before the flood, and then moved down, settled along the area near Mill Creek or Waterfall Town. Something came up, there was a dispute, and in the middle of winter, or at least when it was cold and there was snow on the ground, they moved out, and they formed a temporary home out of cedar bark and became known as the Cedar Bark House, and ended up over time forming their own clan. I believe that Cedar Bark House, the first one, I think, was at what we call Crittenden Creek today. The Teton hat that you can see that Khwáan is wearing in this picture is the Teton clan crest hat. The story, real briefly on that one, is that there was a wrongdoing to, I believe, one of the Teton that were out at Lake Bay, and this was done by some Shimsian that were in a party traveling by, and in order to avoid like a blood feud and a battle, they floated this hat across the lake on incoming tide to the Teton, and that's where they first acquired this hat, as far as I know. See some heads nodding. Hopefully that's right. A couple more Raven clans from Wrangell. The Koskwaidee. They were originally Haida, and they came from the Kasan area. Chief Kadashan was their leader, and there had been some sort of blood feud. And when I say blood feud, there are these things that they go back and forth, and you can look up in some books. There's one about the Khwáan from Sitka and the Wrangell people, and I remember my Aunt Marge and them telling, "Oh, we watch out from those Sitka Khwáan," and so it's like, well, when did that happen? And that happened like in the 17 and 1800s. It was a while ago. There was a few peace ceremonies since then to try to fix that. But so there was these different blood feuds, and apparently something like that was going on with the Haidas from Kasan, and Chief Kadashan offered to give his own life as a sacrifice to end that battle or end that war. And the people from Wrangell were so impressed by that. They said, no, 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 you're not going to do that. And they took him in, and he became a leader, and they ended up having their own clan here in Wrangell. And this was Carol Brady's grandfather. Is that right, Lou? Yes, Carol Brady's grandfather. Tom Gillen's here somewhere. The Talquaidee, it's a great mountain tribe. They spent the flood on the same mountain as the Kiksadi, but after the flood, they went down the west side of the mountain and settled along Thomas Bay. They stayed there for quite some time, and at some point there was a earthquake that caused a big flood, and it caused a lot of damage to their village. The people from Cake came and helped them. That's notable, and they decided to move from there, and some of them moved to Wrangell, and I believe that's how they got to Wrangell in the first place. Much later, they migrated north. They stopped along Thomas Bay again, and I think they are related to some of the Raven tribes further up north in Khwáan. The Kuknahadi, I believe, are a branch off from them. Transition over to the wolf side, and John, I'm going to tell this John sent me some information that just kind of adds a whole lot to what I had known before. We always heard like the Nanyai and the Siknahadi came from the Taku area. They came from the Taku area, but how did they get to there? And that's an interesting story. A number of the wolf clans, and this would be Nanyai and others, came along, and actually, you know what, I'm going to tell that part when I get to their clan. Nanyai came from the Taku area. They settled up the Stikine for quite some time. They went up a different mountain, and they were led up the mountain by a grizzly bear, and they spent their time up there to escape the flood. Eventually, they come down, settle along with the Raven clans in the Mill Creek area. They're there for quite a while, become basically the leading clan, the largest, most influential clan of the area. And at one time there was a dispute, something happened, and a nephew of the chief scarred the face of his uncle, which was a big disgrace. And his father, to avoid things, they tried to settle it by like a property settlement. That wasn't good enough. So they ended up moving, and they went searching for a new home. They ended up down at Old Town, or Poplar Tree Town, because they liked the way the trees and the lay of the land. You have the Salmon Creek, and just they liked it, and they settled there, and they grew their tribe very, very large, to where I've heard like numbers of 10,000, but like over 100 community clan houses in Old Town at one time. There's another point in time, which I'll tell a little later when I go over the written history. 1793, so quite a while ago, the first big tall mast ship comes in, Captain Vancouver, and he wanted to, they say like, bring us your chief, and of course a lot of for us we didn't really have that word, but who's your leader? And it was the chief sheikhs at Poplar Tree Town, and they he didn't want to go up there, but they said, well, we can't sail our ship down the channel, and any of you, well, if you go on Sunday, you'll see you have to go through this really narrow passage. There's lots of rocks, and for a sailing ship to go down there would be very, very dangerous. So Chief Sheikh sent, I've heard stories of 50 or 100 canoes, and they actually they lashed on to their ship and they towed them down the channel by canoe, which is really incredible when you think about that. I'm not going to go into this in detail because I know there's a piece in the booklet where Peter interviewed me on the phone, and anyway, he put it in there. It's about the flotilla, the flotilla robe and the battle with the Shimseans, but that's where there's a blanket that they have. It's often on display out here. They had it at Celebration. It's the one in this picture. Right there, and that came out in, I believe, the 1895 potlatch that was here. But the story goes that the when one of the and I have this covered later. Shakes, when they went to Old Town, he died, passed away. They put up mortuary poles in front of their house, and they had actually the head of the chief in the back of the pole. Somehow it disappeared, and the Tsimshian party got blamed for taking it. And that started a battle, so they captured and killed a bunch of them, but some of them escaped. They went back home, told all of their brothers and sisters, and got everybody riled up. They sent, a couple years later, they sent a big party, war party up to fight. A shaman had a vision of it. I sort of think they had scouts that told them they were coming. They had so many. I remember my Uncle Herb taking us out in front of town here one time. He said, "You see that?" And he pointed down to 12 Mile Island. He said, "Now imagine war canoes with 20 to 40 people in a canoe coming up the channel, 2 by 2, for as long as you can see." You know, that's like 10, 12 miles. So there's a lot of them. The Nanyai were sitting in the Wrangell Harbor, which didn't have a breakwater then, waiting. They had some fast canoes, and they popped out there, and they kind of goaded them into chasing them. They chased them up to Farm Island, where they'd laid a trap for them, and they defeated them. And they so thoroughly defeated them that they took the name of the chief, which was, I believe, Ka Shakes. So they took the name Shakes. They took the crest of the killer whale, the canoe, which is in that. Oh, it's not in this one. It's in the next slide. In the next slide, you'll see it. They took. Actually, this is a different one. They took his canoe, the killer whale canoe, and that was how they got all of that and started the Shakes line. So I do cover that a little bit more. The Chief Shakes line, and this is actually the bear canoe, which I'm going to show you real quick and then come back to this. Mike and I were back in Washington, D.C. with my dad and some others when we were repatriating the Teton clan crest hat. We had an egg for hearing, which we actually won, but the state still didn't want to give it back anyway. That's a long story. We're not going to go into that right now. That's Mike Hoyt, he's right here, but that's him sitting there looking at this canoe, which is, and there, unfortunately, is kind of sad. You can see there's like the bear that's on the bow and the stern is sitting there on a pallet board. And if you could read that description there, it went back there in 1894. That's the same canoe as in this picture. So the Chief Shakes line I was starting to tell you about, there was a Nanyai chief known as Snook or Yukonashuk, or Bring Him Hither. He was chief, and he met a young man that was traveling with the Tequadees, who was an orphan, and he adopted him. And that orphan from the Tequadees became the first Chief Shakes. He was Gushklang or Gushin. And he actually was the one that led the battle that I was just talking about, the flotilla battle, was this Tequadee adopted and into Shakes. Snook made him his nephew and then decided out of all his nephews that he was the one to lead the tribe. Then we had Chief Shakes II. His reign was short because he had smallpox, Kushu, and then Kashik. Chief Shakes III, who was known for caring a lot about his people and would actually like kind of disguise himself and go around to listen to hear what people had to say about their condition and what they thought, how they felt things were going or not going, so he could kind of get a good feel for the condition his people were living in. Then there's Chief Shakes IV, who was the first one to see Caucasians or white men in the area. And then Chief Shakes V, Kawishti, who is the one that moved the town from Old Town to Wrangell, and he took his clan up to Shakes Island, and others followed later. He died in 1878, and he's the one buried on Case Avenue. Chief Shakes VI, who is Gush Tlain, he had the raven pole carved for his son, and dedicated it at the 1895 potlatch. Now, at that potlatch, there's a lot of things that came out of that. We have the flotilla robe. We have the Kiksadi robe that that was at the same time, and we have this raven pole. Chief Shakes VII was Charlie Jones, and we'll talk about him a little bit later, but he was the chief that was installed in 1940, what they called the last potlatch at Shakes Island. Okay, so here are a few more of the wolf clans. So in general, and this part of the story, a lot of the clans kind of go together, but this story came from the Stikine, so I wanted to tell it there. They are a brown bear killer whale clan. They started out their story in Yakutat. They migrated over the St. Elias Mountains, which you think about that says something. And they ended up over in the area around Khwáan for a while. We're not sure really how long. They make their way into the Yukon and Teslin Plateau. They work along, there's a bunch of big lakes back there. They work their way along clear to the upper Stikine, where they run into the Taltans, and then they decide to head back towards the Taku River. They settle there for a long time, and they're trapped by the ice, and they have that story of being up the Taku and stuck above the ice. Now with them, you have the Yunyadi, you have the Nanyai, you have all the wolf clans are in that area. So they make their way back to there into an area called Hitlane for quite a while. And then eventually they make their way down to the mouth of the Taku and Taku Inlet, where Tlinkets would go for grindstones or for sharpening stones to sharpen their weapons. And over a period of time, because they stopped along the way at a few different places, but eventually they make their way to Wrangell Narrows. They come in contact with the Kiksadis from the Shtax'heen Khwáan, and when they asked them where they're from, they said they were from up north near Stikine, meaning they were like from the Grindstone Rock area. When you hear the story, like I've heard a lot of times before, you just hear that last little part, and not all the part of how they got all the way up there. So that's where that clan came from. The Hukadi is another branch of the Nanyai, and they lived out near Leader Bay for a while. And the Yake Khwáan is a branch of the Nanyai who lived up the river at Chickman River and were known as the Foam House people. And I believe that was where the tributary came into the Stikine. It created a lot of foam, and they had a clan house in that area. The last wolf clan I'm going to talk about here is Bill's right here. I think Richard's working, but Richard Oliver, Bill Willard are this clan. Lawrence Bohovic was from this clan, and William Tamery, who's in the picture there, were all from this clan. They're a killer whale clan. They came from the Hit Clan, or the mouth of the Taku River. They're originally Yunyadi, and traveling south, they became other groups. They became the Sakwedi, the Nanyai, and Kayashkiritan. They came to Wrangell Narrows. Eventually, they traveled on south to Old Town and worked their way out to Zarembo Island, where they had a number of clan houses. And the ground was really soggy, so they built their houses up on platforms or on stilts, and became known as the people who lived on posts above things. And that's where the Kayashkiritan have their roots. This picture is really cool. We have Richard wearing their clan crest hat. It has the dorsal fin with a hole in it. And then you see this this other carving here. It's a dorsal fin with the hole, and that's William Tamery. And they just repatriated that, or Bill, have you guys repatriated it already? Or they've got that back from a museum in Alabama just recently. So William Tamery passed away in like 1954, I want to say, something like that, like five or 10 years before I was born. And by the way, he's the one that tells the Tlingit version of the bombardment of Wrangell, too. So I don't know how, yeah, you can actually read that pretty well. There's the story about Captain Vancouver in 1793 that I talk about. Their very first run-in actually came way down past the south end of Wrangell Island. They came across some Stikine Indians, and they actually were very warrior-like, and they were being led by a woman who was urging them on, which I thought, you know, if my grandma Amy was alive, I could see her doing that. Because, and you know, just our women are like that. They're very strong, very powerful, and everybody that knows anything about Southeast Native culture, we know that the aunties run things. So, 1833, so 40 years later, the Russians build a fort here, and then sometime after that, Chief Shakes decides to move up to Shakes Island. The British end up with a 20-year lease after that. And then in 1867, it's called Alaska Day, but that's when Russia thought that they sold Alaska to the United States, or at least the United States thought they were buying a lot more than they actually did. You have the fort gets built in 1869. Somehow through that year, from summer to fall, they put up the stockade and they put up some buildings inside. And I'm not going into this deeply because I know it's already covered, but there's the story told by William Tamry about the bombardment of Wrangell and what all occurred there. In the 1870s, shortly after that, you have the Presbyterian Church and the Catholic Church were built. Tilly Paul Tamry is an active member of the Presbyterian Church. 1879, John Muir, the other stories about him building a big, huge fire up on top of Mount Dewey. But he comes through and he meets a lot of these people. He notes a lot of different things. A couple of years later, Edmonds, that's the Red Book, that the Tlinkets, or what's it called? The Tlingit. He authored a lot of that. It took a long time. Other people helped him finish it. But it has a lot of pictures of Wrangell back at that time, and I think pretty much everybody knows that book or has that book or has seen it at least. 1895, there's the potlatch I was speaking about, the frog blanket, the raven pole, the bear canoe, killer whale flotilla robe, all things that we actually can see and touch today were around then. 1902, they formed the Tongass National, they form Alexander Archipelago Forest Reserve, which later becomes the Tongass National Forest. So it's been around since then. The city of Wrangell is incorporated in 1903. Swanton is here in 1904, and he records a lot of the stories, myths, and legends of Tlingit Indians. He gets a lot of his information from Chief Kadashan. Sometime in 1905, a bunch of our local natives are not happy with the Presbyterian Church and Catholic Church, so they move off and they form the People's Church, which is now St. Philip's Episcopal Church. So that's some of the early written history, and you can see the ties back to prehistory. Like I said, I'm not covering this in detail, but it does need to be mentioned. There's the battle, or not the battle, the bombardment in 1869. But like I said, it's already been told. One of the things I thought was real interesting, and we actually have the song of Skuttu. He held out for a few days, and then in order to stop the bombardment, he turns himself in. I don't think there was any kind of trial. They put him up on the gallows to hang him, and rather than let them execute him, he puts the noose on and jumps off, executes himself after singing his song, after having his last meal. The land claims history. So 132 years ago was Alaska Day, and the local clans and tribes here hire an attorney named Willoughby Clark, and they send him back to Washington, D.C. in 1890 to lobby the president and Congress. So we have been actively fighting and petitioning and asking for our land back. I don't have that T-shirt on. I'll have it on in a couple days. We've been asking for our land back since at least 1890. And, you know, we obviously, we know things like if we get too rowdy and upset about it, then they're going to bomb us. So we try to find peaceful ways to do it. In 1912, the A&B is formed. And in 1915, A&S Camp 1 is formed here in Wrangell. 1920, A&B conventions held in Wrangell and is attended by William and Lewis Paul. In 1922, Tilly Paul Tamery and Charlie Jones, remember Chief Shakes VII, they're arrested for voting at the polls. Now, an interesting thing I think too is I have kind of infamous claim to that. And the person pushing for the arrest was my great-grandfather, Leonard Churchill. Let's see. So William Paul defends, I always like the name of this, he defends their right to vote, and he uses the toilet paper defense. Basically, he says they're civilized people, they eat with a knife and fork, they use toilet paper, they're you know, good citizens, they can read and write, and he wins the case, and Alaska Natives win the right to vote. Of course, then the non-natives or the Caucasian people that didn't want them to vote, they had another law that was the literacy law that said you had to be able to pass a vote, and then they had another way they wouldn't let natives go to school. So then William goes back on the back to court again and wins the right to vote, or not the right to vote, but the right for natives to attend public schools in 1929. I think it was a couple of years later after that, actually. 1934, the Tlingit-Haida Central Council had their first meeting at the A&B Hall in Wrangell. Oh, and by the way, on the pictures, if any of you recognize, that's the A&B Hall in Wrangell in the corner there. And the one in the background is my father, and then William Paul is down in the corner there. There's a number of things going on. So the government, I believe it was the Forest Service, but the U.S. government hires this team, the Goldschmidt-Hawes reports issued. It has possessory rights of natives in Southeast Alaska. And the cool thing, if you can get a hold of that book, is there's a lot of elders that were alive then in the 1940s that have obviously passed since then. And they tell about all the different areas where our people used to live, where there were smokehouses, where there was fish traps, where there were clan houses, where there were forts, and a lot of things that none of us know, other than if you can pick up that book and find it. It is out there. 1954, William Paul, he filed a claim, and William believed, based on just a reading of the law, that natives should have the right to land as they possessed it before 1867. And at that time, of course, everything was owned by clans. And when you read in the possessory rights, it talks about which clans own different areas. This clan owned this stream, that clan owned that blueberry bush, that type of thing. And he believed that was the case, and so he filed suit as Teton, claiming a very large area on the east side of Prince Wales Island. He lost, but the dissenting opinion from the justices that were on the dissenting side, really they used a lot of that went and led to the Alaska Claims Settlement Act language and wording and thought. 1965, and this is kind of why I pointed out the A&B Hall, Wrangell votes and decides to go with Tlingit and Haida. Now, what am I talking about there? And this is something that actually sticks in my mind. So this point of view is really cool in that picture up there, because they used to come in, and I believe there's like restrooms on one side on the bottom, and a kitchen maybe was up above with a place that you could sit and eat. And there's these balconies all the way around. And I think I was like up in that corner up there at this one time, and I was wondering what happened, and what happened was I could see down below. Remember those two little boys that were at the bottom of the pole, my dad and my Uncle Lloyd? Well, then they were grown men. They're standing on one side of the hall, which on this picture we'd look at it'd be like on the right side of the stage. They're standing over there, and everybody else in town is on the other side. Everybody on the other side voted to go with Central Council and go as one tribe. And Dad and his brother believed what their uncle taught them, that we should have gone as clans and filed suit that way. So that's what that was all about. So right or wrong, the vote goes that way. 1968, Tlingit Haida has a settlement, receives $7.5 million on a claim for $75 million. Here's another interesting thing a lot of people don't know, is that Wrangell, all 3 delegates, my dad was one of them, voted no. They didn't go along with it. So there was like 100+ delegates that voted in favor of the settlement for $7.5 million. The Wrangell delegation, and there was 2 others, because I think there was 5 no votes total, voted no, and the reason was they said it wasn't enough money, and the big thing, when my dad would always tell me, the big thing was they didn't have any fishing rights. We gave up all our fishing rights. So that was too much, and that's why we voted no, and so all the Wrangell delegates voted no. 1971, the Alaska Claims Settlement Acts passed, and I'm certainly not going to go into all the history on how that happened, but basically, oil was found on the North Slope. There was a lot of lawsuits filed, and the U.S. government, in order to settle, I believe they gave 44 million acres. Does that sound right? I think it's 44 million acres and $1 billion roughly to all the tribes to form 12 regional corporations and 200 village corporations. There weren't quite 200 at that time. It's a little curious that we got left out, right? We'll talk about that a little bit. Here is the legislative history. So Wrangell's left out. Ketchikan, Wrangell, Petersburg, Haines, and Tenakee are left out of the Land Claim Settlement Act. And it's curious to me because 4 of those towns had sawmills, and that had a lot to do with it. Nobody really knows. I've been back a number of times, but Congressman Young had the theory that there was a deal was made with the timber industry, and we were all left out because there was so much good timber in southern southeast Alaska that Ketchikan, Wrangell, and Petersburg all got left out for that reason. And up in Haines, they had a similar situation. So I'm telling you here, we've been landless since 1867 to today, 153 years. In the 1990s, 97, there was this, the first bill that we had in the 105th Congress. Congress commissioned a report, they call it the ISA report, Institute of Social and Economic Research, to find out why we were left out. And they went into a number of things, because the first thing they'll try to say is, well, Wrangell wasn't a native village. And then if you look at it, neither were Juneau or Sitka. And really, Saxman and Khwáan didn't meet the definition either. So that doesn't make sense. And the reason I went over a number of things, I said, well, did they have an A and B hall? And you go back to that history I had a little bit ago. I mean, we were literally there when it was very first formed. We're there when Tlingit and Haida is formed. We're there when A and B is formed, and we've been an active part of it. Do they have graveyards? Well, we have a graveyard today. Everybody knows that. It's still there today. And so they looked at all those type of things and said, did you have that? And in the ISA report, they said, no, we can see no discernible reason why they were left out. It was intentional. Congress definitely did it, but they don't give a reason why. So Frank Murkowski still lives here, right? So Frank was the senator that introduced our bill back in '97. That was our first landless bill, and Congressman Young introduced the other side on the House. We have had 6 bills now. We're on our 6th bill for landless. The next one was in 2009. So the next 5 are all Lisa Murkowski and Don Young sponsored all of these bills. 2009 in 111th Congress, 2015 in 114th. 2017 in the 115th, and there was actually two parts. There was a bill that was just landless specific, and then there was another one that we were mixed in with a whole lot of other Alaska Native Corporation legislation from up north that really had nothing to do with us, but we were a part of it. And the Alaska Native Veteran allotment was one of those sections. They actually got theirs passed, but they can't claim any land in Southeast Alaska, basically, so that didn't work out too well either. And right now, we have our current bill in the 117th Congress that was put in by Senator Murkowski and co-sponsored by Senator Sullivan, who is a very strong advocate for us, by the way, and then Congressman Young. So where are we at right now? We have had a hearing in the Senate back in June, and we wanted to go to what's called markup, is the next step that you go to, and the committee, the Natural Resource Committee, voted right down party lines, and every Democratic senator voted against, every Republican senator voted for. Lisa Murkowski called him out. She chewed him out pretty good, and I will be going back 2 weeks from now. I'll be going back again, and we're pushing really hard. We think we will get a markup this year. We believe we'll have a markup, hopefully within the month. So once it's through markup, then that bill is ready to pass as a bill. On the House side, unfortunately, our champion for all these years, Don Young, passed away. So he introduced the bill, but he didn't request a hearing. We spent a lot of time, I've been back there, we've spent a lot of time going around trying to get a congressman to sponsor our bill, and they all go, well, you don't have a congressman, kind of out of luck. And we did finally find one. We found a congressman from Minnesota that was on the committee and has agreed to ask for a hearing. We don't have that hearing yet, but we're going to push for it. When I'm back there, we'll be pushing all those Democratic senators. There's a few of them that they seem very sympathetic, and we're hoping if we could just get one. We only need one to vote with us. You probably heard the name Joe Manchin before. He is the chairman of the Natural Resource Committee in the Senate. He's a Democrat. He was against. If we could sway him, we'll pick up 4 or 5 votes, and there'll be plenty. On the House side, we have our new Congresswoman, and we're certain that she'll be an advocate for us, and we'll push for this. Even though she only has a few months, she could make a difference, and we're hopeful on that. So what could we do if we actually had a village corporation? We would be an urban corporation. The way the law is written is we would be an urban corporation similar to Gold Belt or Stikine. So what would we do if we had that? Well, we would have more economic development. We could, do a whole number of things. We could have 8A companies. We could sell carbon credits. We could do a lot of different development. Alaska Native corporations are the #1 employer in the state of Alaska. They create 25% of the state's wealth. We could have scholarships, job training, vocational assistance, dividends, and a balance. We could be in charge of our own land as far as conservation and what we think that means. When you look around at the various village corporations, you have Huna Totem Corporation. They own waterfront in downtown Juneau. $25 million that the cruise line gave them. There's opportunities like that. They have so many jobs in Huna that they don't have enough housing. It's their biggest problem. That's one whole end of the spectrum. Obviously there's some village corporations that aren't as well off as that, but that's the possibility. We could do a whole lot of things if we had this. And that's where we're at. That's what I'm pushing for, and all of you have heard me come up and talk to you a number of times, and I'll continue doing that till the day I die. So when you go back, there he is, the gentleman in the background there, my father, when he was on his deathbed, I literally promised him that I'd keep fighting until we get our land. And I have no doubt that my son Levi and my son Soren will be the same thing. They know the whole story. They know the whole fight. And I tell the congressman, I look him in the eye and say, you know, we will outlast you. We will win. Let's see. So anybody that's interested, I put some bibliography resources for you, and I made it with 7 minutes to spare. So there we go. Doing a sheesh. Do you, yes, we can, absolutely. Let me pull it back up if I can. Which one?
Does anybody have any questions?
You know, I apologize if any of the Klan history is not correct. And I tread lightly when I go there because I don't want to try to tell your history. There's people in the audience that know their own Klan history much better than I do. No questions?
I had a question, but I forgot it because you're so interesting.
Well, that must have been pretty good then.
Well,
Do you
I'm
wanna
trying to the microphone isn't working.
Oh, okay, I can hear you.
I just have to use my river voice. So you said you go back in 2 weeks. So it was presented on the 6th, and it wasn't brought up for discussion, and it has the ability to go back up. Is that what I heard?
So the bill was entered, or had a hearing in June. It was a very procedural thing. Basically, the hearing consisted of the government's witness testifying. And the government's witness, you can go back and look it up, but he says that the government was in favor, which is a big thing, and they were supportive, the government being the Forest Service. Locally, the Forest Service isn't so much in favor. They might be, but they kind of question a lot of things. But from a policy standpoint, Washington, D.C., U.S. Forest Service is supportive. And Lisa Murkowski really pushed him on that. What do you mean? And she really got him to commit and got it in the record that they are supportive. So we got through that part. In July, there was a markup. They went to markup. She had the bill ready to go. There was 4 or 5, maybe 10 bills before. There was about 30 total. That every single one of them went down party line. And she could tell she didn't have the support of the chairman, and that and if we would have lost there, we were done. If you lose at markup, it's over. So she pulled it back at the last minute, but she used her time before she did to kind of scold them and school them a little bit. The plan is, and she has been pushing really hard to get somebody on her side. They have met with Chairman Manchin several times. He knows and likes her and wants to work with her and knows that he needs her for votes later on. So that's important. I said Senator Sullivan's supportive. This was kind of funny. We're there meeting with him, and he comes in all rushed, and he's just like, Dan Sullivan's like a Marine, and he's ready to go. And he gets all pumped up. And we left. Our meeting was about 15 minutes with him. We left, and the next thing you know, we're watching you can see the floor of Congress on television, and you can see there's Lisa talking to Senator Manchin down on the floor. And next thing, here you know, here's Dan Sullivan. He's like, you can't tell what he's saying, but he went right down there and let him know what he thought, and like, what are you doing in my state? And even though he's not on the committee. So our 2 Alaska senators are very strong in support. The rest of the Republican senators will vote on the party line. We just need to get 1 or 2. Senator Hickenlooper from Colorado is, I think, really on the verge of becoming supportive. And there's a few others.
You said in 2 weeks.
So I'm going back, not next week, but then I'm going to travel like on Sunday, a week from Sunday. And I'll be back there meeting with congressmen and senators on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Dayush.
I think I heard this from you, resistance to joining Central Council. Was that because that's a new form of governance for us and he wanted us to stick with our traditional clans? Do you know what the argument was?
It was a legal argument. He just literally reading the law, the way the law was written, where it said that you have to take your use in traditional use. And so traditionally he thought it was clans and that was the traditional use. Thank you. Shishawa.
So, thank you, Richard. That was great. So we have 10 minutes, and then we'll be meeting back in this room, and we'll have James Crippen talking about the Wrangell. Thrower. And then